Around 850 BC, shadows fell across a small house in ancient Israel. These shadows mirror those on your bank account today. In the ancient world, debt wasn't just a number on a screen. It was a physical chain. We see a widow, her pain universal. Her husband, a good man, feared God, yet left a legacy of red ink. This is the first brutal lesson of biblical economics. Good intentions do not provide immunity against bad math. The creditor is at the door. In Hebrew culture, if you couldn't pay, your children became the collateral. They were taken as bondservants, slaves to a system they didn't choose, paying for a past they didn't create. Does this sound familiar? In the 21st century, the creditor doesn't always show up with iron chains. He shows up as a 24% APR on a credit card, or a mortgage that swallows 50% of your pay. He shows up as inflation, the silent thief that devalues your labor while you sleep. Most people live in a modern two kings fall. Their future, their children's inheritance, is sold off. It pays for debts of a system designed to keep them in a cycle of interest and anxiety. The widow's first instinct was despair. She went to Elisha the prophet, crying out for a miracle. She wanted a bailout, for the debt to simply vanish. But Elisha did something counterintuitive. He didn't give her gold or write a check. He didn't pray for the creditor to go away. Instead, he asked a question that shifted everything. What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have? This is the liquidity crunch moment. Most people, facing financial collapse, focus on the problem. They watch the news, track interest rates, lament the lack of help. They are looking outward. Elisha forces the widow, and he is forcing you right now, to look inward. The system wants you to believe you are a zero, powerless without a loan or a lucky break. The widow's initial response was the poverty reflex. She said, "Your maidservant has nothing there at all." Stop right there. This is the most dangerous lie in wealth creation. The belief that you have nothing. This is the mindset of a slave. As long as you believe you have nothing, God himself has nothing to work with. Wealth is not created from a vacuum, it is grown from a seed. But then, she catches herself. She remembers, except a jar of oil. That except is where empires are born. That tiny jar of oil, the asuk, wasn't a massive vat. It was a small flask, perhaps just enough for one anointing. In economic terms, this was her minimum viable product. It was her only remaining asset with a positive ROI potential. In this block, we are breaking down the spirit of the creditor. We are identifying why debt is a geopolitical weapon. It's used to enslave nations and individuals alike. We are setting the stage for the greatest wealth transfer in the Bible. The creditor is standing at the door. Your children, your future dreams are on the line. The question isn't when will the government fix the economy. The question is, what do you have in the house? If you feel like you are at the end of your rope, if the interest rates of life are suffocating you, you are exactly where the widow was. You are in the perfect position for a supercycle of provision. But before the oil can flow, we have to address the vessel capacity. Most people pray for more oil money, but they have no vessels, systems, structure to hold it. If the oil fell right now, it would just soak into the dirt and be wasted. The prophet is about to give her an order that defies conventional economic logic. He's going to tell her to use OPM, other people's material. He's going to teach her how to scale a business with zero initial capital. Are you ready to stop being the victim of the creditor and start becoming the master of the flow? Elisha's next command is perhaps the most famous strategic move in biblical history. He says, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few." In modern business, we call this OPM, other people's material and resources. Elisha was teaching the widow a lesson that every elite investor knows. Your growth is limited by your infrastructure, not by your potential. The miracle was ready, the oil was divine, but the vessels had to be human. Notice the detail. Don't ask for just a few. This is the rejection of the small business mindset. Most people fail because they prepare for a trickle when God is sending a flood. They open a tiny savings account for $1 million dream. They build a side hustle with the capacity of a hobby, and then wonder why they can't quit their 9 to 5. If the widow had only borrowed 3 jars, the miracle would have stopped at 3 jars. The oil didn't run out because of a lack of supply. It stopped because of a lack of capacity. This phase of the story represents the wilderness of preparation. Before the money hits your account, you must have the systems to hold it. This is why lottery winners go broke and why most people who receive a windfall end up deeper in debt within 24 months. They have the oil capital, but they are still using small jars, poor habits. The widow had to go to her neighbors. This required humility and networking. To get out of a hole, you cannot stay isolated. You must leverage the community, the technology, and the platforms available to you. Those jars represented the market capacity. By gathering vessels from others, she was essentially building a supply chain. She was building a supply chain for a product she didn't even have in bulk yet. Think about your current situation. You are praying for a 6-figure income, but do you have a 6-figure character? Do you have the accounting systems, the discipline, and the vessels ready to hold that level of liquidity? If you are still leaking money on liabilities, your vessels are broken. Elisha was forcing her to act like a warehouse manager before she was a millionaire. She had to organize the logistics, clear the floor space, and prepare for a massive influx of inventory. This is the stewardship in obscurity phase. No one sees the oil yet. The neighbors just see a widow collecting empty pots. They probably laughed. They probably thought she was losing her mind. This is the psychological depth of wealth creation. You must be willing to look crazy to the world while you build the containers for your future. You are collecting empty jars, skills, education, systems, networks, while the world is busy crying about the empty pockets. But here is the secret. The prophet told her to borrow empty vessels. Why? Because you cannot fill what is already full. If those jars were full of water or wine, there would be no room for the oil. To receive the new wealth transfer, you must empty yourself of the old poverty logic. You must empty your schedule of low ROI activities. You must empty your mind of the excuses the creditor gave you. The sons are bringing in the jars. The house is crowded with potential. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation. The infrastructure is set. The debt is still there. The creditor is still waiting. But the strategy has shifted from survival to scalability. Now, the door is about to close. In an age of constant distraction and social media noise, the next step is the most difficult for the modern entrepreneur to follow. It is the law of concentrated focus. The stage is set. The vessels are ready. But the oil will not flow in front of the crowd. It requires a closed door. Why must the door be shut? And why does the oil only flow as long as there is a vessel to receive it? The answer lies in the law of the flow, and it's what we will uncover in the next block. The door is shut. The world is locked out. Elisha's command was specific. Go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. In the world of high-performance wealth creation, we call this deep work the oil. The secret source of your success cannot be produced in a marketplace. It cannot be produced in a marketplace full of skeptics, creditors, and yes-men. The flow requires a sanctuary of focus. Now, look at the logistics. The widow begins to pour one small flask of oil against a mountain of empty jars. Mathematically, it's impossible. Economically, it's the multiplication of assets. As she pours, the oil doesn't stop. This is the law of the continuous flow. In modern finance, this represents cash flow. Most people chase big wins or one-time windfalls, but the biblical secret to wealth is the constant flow. The oil kept pouring as long as there was a vessel to receive it. Here is the secret code of block 3. Supply follows capacity. Most people think they have a money problem, but they actually have a capacity problem. They stop pouring because they run out of ideas, run out of systems, or run out of space to grow. The widow's sons were the operations managers. Their job was to keep the supply chain moving. As soon as one vessel was full, they brought another. This is a lesson in scaling. You don't wait for the oil to stop to find a new jar. You have the next jar ready before the current one is full. This is how you build a conglomerate. This is how you move from a side hustle to a kingdom enterprise. Let's talk about the 20% rule of stewardship. In ancient times, oil was more than just food. It was fuel, medicine, and currency. By filling every jar, she was diversifying her portfolio. She didn't just have one big tank, she had hundreds of individual units of value. If one jar cracked, she still had 99% of her wealth intact. This is the biblical root of diversification, but there is a haunting moment in this story. She asks her son, "Bring me another jar," and he replies, "There is not a jar left." At that exact moment, the text says, the oil stayed. It didn't run out because God was tired. It didn't run out because the olive trees in Israel died. It stopped because there was no more structure to hold it. This is a warning to every entrepreneur and investor watching this. Your income will never exceed your personal and structural development. If you stop learning systems, if you stop borrowing jars, expanding your vision, your oil will stay. You will hit a revenue ceiling that no amount of prayer can break until you provide a new vessel. The house is now full. The air is heavy with the scent of fresh high-grade olive oil. In one afternoon, this woman went from having a negative net worth to holding one of the largest inventories of liquid gold in her region. But she is still behind a closed door. She has the asset, but she doesn't have the liquidity yet. The creditor is still technically her legal master. The wealth has been created, but it has not been realized. In the next block, we will see what happens when the market meets the miracle. We will see how the transfer of wealth actually happens during a crisis, and why the unprepared are about to lose everything while the prepared take over. The crash is coming. The debt collectors are coming, but the jars are full. Cinematic 8000 photorealistic dramatic chiaroscuro lighting. The scene, the door of the house swings open. The widow stands at the threshold, no longer trembling, but with the posture of a CEO. Visuals behind her. The house is glowing with the amber light of hundreds of full oil jars. The creditor, standing in the dusty street with his iron chains and ledger, looking shocked, his jaw dropped as he realizes the power dynamic has shifted. Atmosphere, a financial victory moment. High contrast, epic film grade, Unreal Engine 5 style. The door opens and the atmosphere changes. The creditor was waiting for a victim, but he found a provider. In the world of macroeconomics, there is a phenomenon called the transfer of wealth. It happens during every recession, every market crash, and every period of hyperinflation. Wealth is never truly destroyed. It is simply moved from those who have no vessels to those who have full jars. While the rest of Israel was likely suffering under the same economic drought and debt cycles, this woman had performed a private quantitative easing. She created value where there was none. Let's look at the harsh reality of the creditor system. Debt is designed to be a permanent state. The system doesn't want you to pay off the principal. It wants you to service the interest forever. It wants your children, your future time and energy to be its collateral. When the widow stepped out of that house, she wasn't just paying a bill. She was breaking a systemic curse. This is the transfer of wealth protocol. 1. Identification. The prepared the widow identified the asset, the oil. 2. Isolation. The prepared shut the door on the noise of the crash to focus on production. 3. Liquidation. The prepared bring their value to a market that is desperate for it. Notice that Elisha didn't tell her to give the oil away for free. He didn't tell her to start a charity. He gave her a business order. Go, sell the oil. Greater than to escape the slave class. You must understand the law of the market. The market doesn't pay for your need. The market doesn't care that you have a debt. The market only pays for value. Because she had the oil, a high-demand commodity in a time of crisis, she now held the levers of power. Imagine the scene. The neighbor who lent her an empty jar for free now sees that jar filled with the finest oil. This creates a microeconomy in her village. She has the liquidity that everyone else lacks. In a recession, cash is king. But commodities are God. Greater than the unprepared are those who spent the good years consuming and emptying their jars. When the crisis hits, they have nothing to sell. They become the sellers of themselves, selling their time for pennies just to survive. But the prepared, the 1% who follow biblical strategy, become the lenders. The widow goes from the defensive, hiding from creditors, to the offensive, dominating the market. This is the shift we want for you. We don't want you to just survive the coming economic supercycle. We want you to be the one holding the oil when the world is running on empty. The creditor's ledger is about to be wiped clean. But the story doesn't end with a zero balance. The prophet has one final, life-altering instruction that separates temporary relief from generational wealth. Most people, if they got a windfall like this, would pay the debt and go right back to their old habits. They would buy a fancier tent or better clothes and find themselves in debt again in 6 months. But the biblical strategy has a retention phase. What is the secret to not just getting rich, but staying rich? What is the rest that Elisha told her to live on? Cinematic 8,000 photorealistic dramatic lighting. The widow, now looking radiant, standing with her 2 sons in a lush garden outside their home. They are dressed in new fine linen garments, symbolizing their new status. The scene. In the background, their home is reinforced and prosperous. No creditors in sight. Visuals. The sons are no longer carrying heavy jars but are holding scrolls, deeds, contracts and bags of silver coins. Atmosphere, peace, shalom, and total financial sovereignty. The sun is rising over the hills of Israel, symbolizing a new era. High contrast, Unreal Engine 5 style. The miracle is complete, the market has been served, and the jars have been converted into liquid capital. Now comes the most important sentence of the entire strategic encounter. Elisha says, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest." Notice the order of operations. This is the biblical hierarchy of cash flow. 1. Settlement. Pay your debt. Integrity is the foundation of wealth. You cannot build a kingdom on stolen time or borrowed money. The first act of freedom is the total decapitation of the debt. 2. Sustenance. Live on the rest. This is the birth of the family estate. In the modern world, most people live on the gross, pray for the surplus, and die in the deficit. The widow was commanded to live on the rest, the remainder. This implies that the miracle provided more than enough. It provided a capital reserve. Why is this so critical for your Dark Channel audience? Because the goal isn't just to get out of debt. The goal is to never be a slave again. The rest represents passive income and asset management. The oil was a one-time supernatural event that created a lifetime of equity. When the prophet told her to live on the rest, he was telling her to become an investor, to take that surplus and put it into land, into livestock, into commerce, to ensure that her sons would never again be collateral for a creditor. This is the true meaning of Goshen. In the Bible, Goshen was the place of protection during the plagues of Egypt. Financial sovereignty is your modern-day Goshen. It is the ability to protect your family when the supercycle of the global economy turns dark. When you have the rest stored in full jars assets, you are no longer a victim of the news. You are a spectator of history. But there is a final spiritual layer to this strategy: humility. Greater than. The widow didn't keep the oil to show off to her neighbors. She didn't buy a chariot she couldn't afford. She followed the instruction of the mentor. Wealth, in the biblical sense, is a trust. You are the manager of the oil, not the owner of the miracle. As long as you maintain the manager mindset, the flow remains available. The moment you shift to owner arrogance, the vessels dry up. As we close this masterclass, look at your house. Stop crying about the creditor at your door. Stop waiting for a bailout that will only enslave you further. Look for your jar of oil. Look for that skill, that asset, that tiny seed of value that you have dismissed as nothing. Gather your vessels, build your systems. Shut the door on the distractions of a dying system, and pour. The oil is waiting for the capacity. The wealth is waiting for the structure. The debt is waiting to be paid. Go, sell, pay, and live on the rest. If this biblical strategy shifted your perspective, don't just watch it, implement it. Subscribe to join our remnant of financially sovereign believers. Comment below with "I am gathering my vessels" to signal your commitment to this protocol. Your inheritance is not for sale.